What's the date today?
Today is the 22nd.
Am I the narrator?
Yes, you are the narrator.
This will be very interesting.
And you know what? I am supposed to take a picture of you as well, if you're okay with that.
That's fine.
I'm just trying to take it without the stuff in there, you know? All right, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're going to find that, and I'm going to be so this is my church.
Wow.
I pastor here. I've been pastoring here since 2014.
Okay.
I left the city council in 2014, and that's when I established my ministry here. But I've been in ministry since 1999, and all the stops that I were prior to getting here to 2014 when we started this church, I was already in full-time ministry. So when I was on city council, I was a full-time minister. When I worked at the LA County Federation of Labor from 1999 to 2010, when I came on city council, I was a full-time minister.
Okay.
Ministry has always been just so you understand where I'm coming from.
Sure.
Ministry has always been the background for everything that I've done. Okay. So I've been in spaces where I don't understand it at all. I don't understand why God has me there. But now, as I look back and see the progression and where everything is right now, it makes perfect sense to me.
And I'm very eager, obviously, to hear about your time at City Council, what you're doing now. But I want to ask that we begin at the beginning.
Beginning.
And ask about who are your parents? Where did you grow up? What's their story?
Excellent. So, both of my parents are from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Okay.
So I've got very deep roots in the South. My dad was in the Navy, and he left North Carolina because he traveled all over the world. He was in the Navy. You know, one of Pier T, which is a pier at the Port of Long Beach, which I now set strategic policy for, was a place he was stationed at when I was born. So that's how I get here. My dad and my mom came from North Carolina. My mom, of course, was in love with my dad. My dad left Winston-Salem in 1955. He came to California. My mom left sometime later. They weren't together, but they were close enough in proximity where they finally get together. I'm the outcome of that. And when I look back at the history, what I do at the Port of Long Beach, and see that the area which brought them here is now part of the port, it just kind of blows me away.
Right. So they are both from
Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
They meet here.
No, they met there. They knew each other.
Oh, they knew each other. Okay.
So my dad left. He joined the Navy after he got out of high school in 1954, 55.
So
he got stationed in San Diego.
Okay.
And then my mom's sister lived here in Los Angeles.
Okay.
and my mom came out. My mom and her baby sister came out. Her baby sister finished high school in this area. They were from North Carolina, but they lived with their mother's sister,
Okay.
who effectively was my grandmother, because my grandmother was back on the East Coast, but I grew up amongst her baby sister.
Okay.
So she was like Auntie Grandma.
Where'd you all live?
So we lived, very interesting. When I was born, my parents lived in San Pedro. Then they moved to Compton, and they stayed in Compton until I was about 5 years old. And then we moved from Compton to what is now called Carson, but when we moved there, it was called Gardena, because it was a new development. Yeah, I used to call it the end of the world, because, you know, Compton, if you know the area by Central Avenue and Artesia.
Okay.
So my parents lived, if you go north down Central, they lived in the residential area that was close to the two cemeteries there at Greenleaf and Central. So when I was 4 or 5 years old, I lived there. But my dad bought a house in a new development, which, you know, ultimately ended up being the city of Carson. But when we moved there, it was considered Gardena. Right? Because it was, you know, we called it the boonies. It was on the outskirts. It was, you know, everything on the Artesia Freeway. There was no Artesia Freeway. There was Artesia Boulevard.
Right.
There was no freeway there. The freeway was built until 1971. My parents moved there in 66 from Compton, and then that area transformed. It is today Carson, but when we moved there, it was considered Gardena because it wasn't incorporated. And that's directly across from Cal State Dominguez Hill. So this framing that I'm setting for you, this is around 1966. This is right after the 1965 riots in Watts. Right. So Cal State Dominguez was developed for African Americans to go to secondary education.
And, you know, just so you know, my wife is the Dean of College of Education at Cal State Dominguez Hills.
Just so you know, and from a personal perspective, I live in North Long Beach. I can walk to Compton College from my house. I've grown up in Compton, Carson. You know, this whole area is like, people say, where are you from? I'm really from this area because my parents have lived in different spaces, and, you know, then I've lived in spaces that correspond. And
so was there redlining then that your folks couldn't buy in certain areas and could buy?
Yeah, well, you know, systematic racism is a huge problem in this region. Now, at the time, think about it. So I'm born in 1960. I'll be 64 this year. So when my parents are making this move, I'm 6. I'm part of Compton Unified School District, and we kept all of that. But the point I want to make is there is a regional, you know, outside of, you know, I'm from Long Beach, because, you know, even when I ran for office, when I ran for office the first time, one of the things that our opponents used against me is that he's not from Long Beach, he's from Compton.
Right.
But I'm running to represent a shared constituency, right, that Compton and Long Beach has, that's that really I've grown up in.
That's really interesting. I didn't think
that I've grown up in, right? I've been here all my life, since I was 6 years old. So I understand the nuances, I understand the demographics, I understand all of that. What I didn't understand when I got involved in it was politics. I understood demographics and what the reality is on the ground, but what I learned over the course of my, I'd say my professional career, was politics. Because I ended up becoming a union steward, and I was like, I'm not going to do the politics of the union. I hate politics, and I ended up running the freaking union, right? Everything in my life centers around politics. It was the thing I said I wasn't going to do, which I'm involved in the most. And when I translate that and take it out of the political realm, the same things happens in the spiritual realm for me as far as what I deal with in regards to funerals and weddings and all of those things. So there's a correspondence there, which made me finally come to a conclusion that this is the will of God concerning me. This is the space I got to work in. Right? And how do you, instead of compartmentalizing those two spaces, how do you make it in cohesion? Right. And that's kind of been my life work.
And I really want to get into a lot more detail about, because that was one of my questions. How do you become a political actor? How do you join this formal world?
Well, all I can say is my experience, and through my experience, I see entry points, right? But it's going to be hard. This is just my perspective. It's going to be hard for people to understand the perspective I'm coming from, because I've said this to people all the time. I'm not a politician. I'm a pastor that's called to the community. So I've been used in spaces, and I understand those spaces. I actually like them. I function in them well, but that's not the totality of the person, right? It's just an area that you can have influence and make a lot of change for a mass amount of people. So I try to leverage that.
So just to get back to your folks in that early part of your life, they end up buying this place in
Harbor City.
Harbor City. Oh, Harbor City.
It's called Harbor City at the time.
Okay.
Well, no, I'm in Carson right now.
Yeah.
So it's called Gardena, but it's ultimately today, if you went and looked at the address, it would say Carson. Okay. It's in District 1, I believe, of Carson.
Okay.
But I moved there when I was 6 years old in 1966, and there was no Carson. Carson wasn't incorporated until 1971. Okay. So there was no city of Carson. It was part of the city of Gardena, but the students and all of the folks in education went to Compton Unified School District, not LA.
For some reason, I thought all these little cities were sort of created after Lakewood,
No, Compton has been around for a long time, and Carson was fully incorporated in 1971.
Okay.
But this area that I'm talking about, how familiar are you with this area?
I've lived here for about 15 years.
Okay, so you know where Central Avenue is off the 91.
Yeah.
So let me frame this for you in perspective of me. So when I'm 3-4 years old, my parents live off of Wilmington and Compton Boulevard. And then, they're renters. My mom and dad are 24, 25. I'm their only child. My brother comes in 63, and now they're a two-child family. My dad is working in banking, and my mom is a nurse. So they moved from where we were at Compton Boulevard in Wilmington, and then they move over to off of Greenleaf in Central, very close to the cemetery. So we stayed there a couple of years. My parents are renting. My dad he's doing all kinds of things. He's working for the bank, he's going to school, he's going to night school, and because he's a Navy Reserve, he's working at the port. What is now the port, but it was the Navy back then. Right? So it was the Navy back then. So he uses his GI Bill. He moves from the place they're renting into the city called Harbor City. But in the interim, he bought a house, the one that I was talking about, off Central. It's Central on Artesia Boulevard. There's a little track. It's called Stevenson Village, but it's Carson today. But when we first moved there, it was Gardena because there was no Carson. Carson didn't exist for another 6 years. So that's kind of my background. I've grown up in those areas. And then when I was 14, Compton, in 1972, 73, 74, Compton was the murder capital of the United States, particularly for black males. So my dad didn't want me to go to Compton High because we're part of the school district. So he moves further south to Sepulveda and Western, which is unincorporated LA County, right on the border of, you've got Lomita, you've got the city of Carson, you've got the city of Torrance, all on its borders. So he moves there when I'm 14, and I stay there from the time I'm 14 until I'm 18, because once I graduated from high school, I moved out on my own, and I moved to San Pedro, where they lived when I was born. So I stay in San Pedro for 3 or 4 years, and then I moved from San Pedro, and this is around 78, so around 81, I moved to Long Beach, and I've kind of been in between Long Beach and Compton ever since.
So, you tell me if this is unnecessary, but I'm just curious, what was high school life like? What was the social worlds that you were sort of
Well, for me, you know, I graduated from high school in 1979. So my parents moved in 1974 from what I considered Compton, because all of my environment, all the people that I interacted with, they were from Compton. I moved from Compton to Harbor City in 1974. It was the last 2 months before the 8th grade. And that was a huge culture shock for me, because I had only grown up around African Americans and Latinos. And then when my parents moved to Harbor City, there were Asians, there were white folks, there were Samoans, there was all of these other nationalities that I had never had interaction with. But I look back on my life and say that was probably one of the best times of my life. Because it gave me a perspective on people. So I stayed there from 74. My parents moved there in 74. In 78, I moved out on my own. I moved to San Pedro. And I stayed there for about 3 years. And then I moved to Long Beach. And I've been bouncing around Long Beach. I bought a house in Moreno Valley when I was 22. But I was working in Long Beach. It was 74 miles one way to get to work.
What were you doing?
I was an operator at the phone company, which ultimately led me to politics. So I was an operator. I worked for General Telephone at the time. I was working on Spring and Palo Verde. I got married when I was 20 years old. I've been a father since I was 20 years old. And I bought a house when I was 22 in Moreno Valley and drove to Long Beach. That lasted about 10 months before I just totally lost it. And then I've been back and forth to Long Beach or Carson ever since.
So you've been a parent since you were a young man.
Yeah. I have 5 daughters and 1 son. The 5 daughters have given me 12 grandkids. The eldest being 20, the youngest being 9.
Okay.
And then, of course, my son is the youngest, so he has no kids because he has 12 nieces and nephews.
Maybe we can shut that door. I'm wondering.
Sure.
Oh, wait, these guys are going.
Yeah, I want to just close the door, just for a little while.
Okay, well, we'll do what we can. I think that's... so you have been a young parent. You've been a parent for...
all my adult life.
I mean, wow, yeah.
All my adult life.
Right.
So my eldest daughter is actually coming into LA today. She lives in San Antonio. She's, it was 2024. She is 43 years old. My eldest daughter. So my eldest daughter has produced 4 grandkids for her. She has 4 boys. The eldest being 20, the youngest being 9. Right? And then my second daughter has 3 kids. The eldest, he's actually the eldest of all the grandkids. He's 20, but on the verge of 21. And then she has 2 daughters. Then my third daughter has 2 daughters. My eldest granddaughter, her eldest being 19, she's over at UNLV, and her youngest is a senior. Well, she just left Lakewood. Then the daughter after her, where am I at? 4. The daughter after her has 1 son, and he's closer to the bottom. He's about 10. Then my youngest daughter has 2. She has a daughter and a son. And her daughter is about 12, 13, and her son is about 9. Then I have a son. But the thing about it is, I'm in my second marriage. And when we married, my wife had 2 daughters and I had 3, but they all kind of fall in step. Right. So they're kind of like stair steps. And we've been together for, it'll be 30 years married, 33 years together, coming up this year. So it's been an interesting run.
Nice.
But I've always had kids. For as long as I've been an adult, I remember the day my daughter was born, my eldest daughter, I cried for 2 days. Like, I can barely take care of myself. I'm not gonna be somebody's dad. But yeah, she's 43 now.
Wow.
Doing some great things.
So you were working as a operator
from 1982 until 1989.
Okay.
So from 82, I got hired at General Telephone. I was in operator services. I joined the union around 87. So I'd been there for about 5 years. And then I became a union steward. Then I ran for office in 1990.
So what's a union steward? Pardon my ignorance. I'm just curious.
Well, you know, in workplaces, particularly like operator services, the way it existed there, union stewards kind of speak on behalf of the workers. So we worked in environments that had between 100 and 300 workers. So the workers kind of pick who they want to represent them. And I was one of those people that they said, oh, we want you to talk to management about things that we're concerned with. So that's coming from a worker's standpoint, but you also have a union which has a structure to train people to do those things. And sometimes those things don't work in connection. Because when I tried to become a union steward, the people in the union wouldn't let me become a steward. But the people that in my work environment wanted me to.
Yeah. So why did they not want you to be a steward?
Well, there was a lot of transition. They were transitioning. They were consolidating powers. So we were in Long Beach, but they were consolidating Santa Fe Springs and Pico Rivera and all these areas up north, trying to bring everybody together.
Okay.
So it was just the kind of the culture and the nature of the day. So it took me a few years to get approved by the people in Long Beach to be the steward. I had been involved for 3 years before I actually became official and working in the capacity.
Okay.
Which is very similar to what happened to me in the city of Long Beach. When you look at my trajectory, and I've been doing policy in Long Beach consistently since 2006. Either on the board or commission, the city council since 2006. Okay. I've been active in Long Beach since 2003. But from 2006 on, I've operated in some space in a official capacity of the city.
And I want to know what it means to do politics, right? And but just to wrap up this portion.
You want to move into the other room? I didn't realize. I had no idea it was going to be like this.
Oh, no,
they told me what was going on, but I've been doing my services virtually for the last 2 months. Better any place we go.
I know.
They've taken all the chairs out. I apologize.
Oh no, it's okay. It's okay.
But yeah, we may have to do a second session. No, this is challenging. I had no idea. When I was here last week, it didn't look like this.
So you began as a union steward, and just as a slight aside, what I want to come back to is it seems as if that business became automated at a certain time in a different kind of way, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about automation as it's arriving in the ports, but that's for later. I just wanted to put it on your radar screen.
I think automation as a topic is something that we're going to face in just about every industry in one way or another.
Right.
We really have to be conscientious about how that evolves. Okay. It's inevitable, right? But we have to, this is my perspective, from a policy perspective, we have to make sure that as we automate, we're still benefiting the people that are involved in, the people that we've given charge over. And that's probably the best way to say it. Automation is inevitable, but there's a way that you can do it that I believe that is palatable, where everybody eats to a time. Now, how long that time is, I couldn't tell you. But, it's something from a personal perspective, where we are now, just in my professional life, I saw this coming 25 years ago. And
in what way did you see it coming?
Well, in 2021, I was working for the same organization I work for now, the LA County Federation of Labor. And I remember a tour to the ports in China in 2021 or 2001, 2002, and how automated they were then is where we are now. That was 20 years ago, right? So I saw what was coming, not having the knowledge base and understanding and dealing with those systems that I do today, but I saw this 20 years ago, right? So it's happening in other places.
This stuff is fascinating to me. It's something I'm vested in. But to return to my official task, I wanted to continue to sort of chart your journey. So you become involved with the union.
1987.
And is that a full-time job?
No.
Or is that
So the way this works, in 87, I become a union steward for Communication Workers of America, Local 9586. So at that time, and even to this day, they represent your phone service here in Long Beach. Okay. Now, the difference is, when I got involved in 1987, This union had 40,000 members. It was the second largest GTE, which is now Verizon or Frontier, whatever they call themselves today. It was the second largest GTE unit in the state of California. So in labor terms, that has there's a lot of prestige that come with that, as well as responsibility. But I say that to say, when I became a union steward, this union had 40,000 members. Today they have 400. 400. Which really, in the space, when we talk about labor in general, it makes them irrelevant. It makes them irrelevant. And I've got theories on why that is and how we get to that place, only because I'm involved in the history and I've seen it happen. But I think what we experience as communication workers is common in the labor ranks on how things work. So that's something that we have to come back and touch on. But
yeah, no, I'm fascinated. There's so many different pathways. So it's not a full-time job, but it's something that you become vested in, and it feels important to you. I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
No, that's accurate. And my personal thing is every time I try to get out, I get a promotion. And as I look back on it, because like you said, I think the beauty of that work in its pure sense, and remember, I'm not really a politician. I'm somebody that believes in the words of Scripture. So I try to live that out of my life, and then it plays out in these different arenas that people say, oh, you can't be in that space because you're this. People put labels on it. You're a pastor, you can't operate here. But the way I look at it is, there are certain things that I've been endowed with, like gifts and talents. One might be administration. One might be strategy, right? And you need those things to move a community or people when you're trying to do something for a movement, and not talking about my four and no more. All I want is for us to prosper. When you're talking about a movement that is going to move generations and numerous people and help their lives get better, that's kind of the thing that motivates me. So how it plays out might not have been the way I thought it was going to play out, but as I get retrospective in my 60s and see how long I've been in this space, it's like it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense, and it's really interesting, and I'm so thankful because I've worked in politics, I've worked in clergy, I've been in healthcare, I've been in nonprofit. I've been in a lot of spaces around some great and nationally known leaders in those spaces, and I've gleaned something from all of them, right? And how they move, how they operate. But there's also a common denominator in all of them in regard to their passion for whatever field it was they were called to. Whereas I might not be holistically here, I look at all of these as moving to a ultimate goal where everybody eats, and my whole philosophy the whole time I've been involved in collaborative space is leveraging and making sure that we can do the most for whatever our constituency is, without doing it at the expense of others.
Yeah, the question that popped in my mind when we were going down this particular road was, you said earlier that one of the ways in which your initial people running against you were saying you're not from Long Beach, right? And you said that actually I'm from all over here. How do you manage being a representative of something specific, like a district, versus an obligation that's to a larger kind of community?
Well, I think when we move into that political space and how you operate in that realm, you've got to be able to compartmentalize, right? You've got to be able to kind of sit back and take an assessment of the whole, and whatever it is that your plan, your agenda, whatever it is, those things that you're passionate about that you want to move, it's a collaborative space. You can't do it just with the people in your circles. You got to build collaborations with other segments of society. So that's a firm belief for me. So in that, and trying to strategize and kind of play chess when people are playing checkers, is how can we move an agenda that we firmly believe in, not coming from a place of self-interest, but where we can really lift everybody. How can we move an agenda that the masses of people can get behind? And that's it takes thought leaders that, number one, have a passion for what they believe in, and also, number two, have a really strong belief that whatever this vision is, it's accomplishable. And that's the basis that I try to work with. It's like I understand, only because of my life experiences, that I've been put in all these different places to be able to have entry, access, and some influence, depending on the space, with people that can make decisions. Right. That's how things get changed. Right? I've got to be able to have access. I've got to be able to have some influence where at least they'll listen to what some of the things that we become thought partners in different spaces. And I think that's the key for us to move in a societal agenda and recognize that, and this is truly philosophical, right? Because to make it play out is the challenge. But how do you bring everybody into the tent and make sure that you're not going to get everything that you want, but collaboratively we're working toward an agenda that's going to help everybody?
Sorry to go back and forth like
that's
this.
That's
fine. So you become active in the union. What's the next step that sort of leads you down the path that you find yourself in?
I think the biggest step was in 1999. So I was working for the union. So I'm living here. I'm the executive vice president of the local, I'm talking about CWA 9586. So in that, my responsibility includes arbitrations, grievances, everybody that gets fired from General Telephone in my sector, everyone that gets fired comes across my desk, so I know how to reach out, blah, blah, blah. So I play in this role, but the big part of my role is there's a joint labor management campaign for United Way, where the union and the company have to work together. So over the course of time, I end up running that campaign, and in that, it strengthened relationships that I had as a union representative with company representatives, because we were always dealing in adversarial relationships, grievances, arbitrations. But when it came to the United Way, it was a collaborative.
So were they actually the people you worked with in previous occasions, or was it just that you had that skill set because you
No, some of them were the people that I worked with, or the people that I was working with were working for them.
Okay.
So there were directives that were coming directly from them, that because of relationships, we were at least able to have dialogue and move an agenda that benefited more people.
I can see how central that is for someone, as you were saying, where you have to build coalitions and collaborations to work with, when it's always this confrontational kind of relationship. If you can still work with those people, that's a profound skill set.
When you really break down politics, that's the key to politics. Is let's put aside the things that we differ on. Let's start from the places we agree on, and then let's work out from there. Because we already know the things that we don't agree on. So if we start from there, we're already adversarial. But if we start on the things that we agree on and work out from there, it's going to help us in those areas that we disagree on. Because now we're going to be forming relationships and understanding how people operate, blah, blah, blah. And it just puts us in a better environment to do the most for the most people.
So what does this look like on a daily level, right? As just somebody who doesn't know, what does it mean to do this? I get it conceptually, but what does it mean to actually on a day-to-day basis?
You know, I think that's really hard to define. Because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to whatever the people we're talking about, whatever their motivation is, whatever their moral compass is, right? You know, I think you're understanding me. My motivation is, I understand I have a calling on my life. I understand I have gifts and talents. I understand that I utilize these gifts and talents in spaces that a lot of people that I operate say you can't be in that space. And I'm like, no, I believe I'm in this space because of who I am, and let's figure out a way that we can work. But to define it is an individual thing. You would have to define it for you. I would have to define it for me. My goal would be that we all come to a thought pattern where we're going to try to do the most good for the most people, understanding that we may have different ideas of how we get there, right? But if our goal is the same and we have a deep enough relationship, it gives us the opportunity to talk about how we get there, as opposed to you said this and I said that and that's it. To me, to truly be effective in the space of politics, for the lack of a better definition, is to be able to have relationships. Right. Relationships where I said you have access to a decision maker and you have some influence with them. To truly be effective, a leader has to have those skills. Right? And, you know, and just go from there and you play things out the way they play out, right? And respond accordingly.
So you go from the Union to United Way, and you're there for 10 years or something like that. If I recall something like that,
yeah,
in one of the
about
bios.
11 years, yeah. And then I come to City Council.
Okay. So what was the decision that made you say, hey, I need to run for office?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's a background story where my wife will tell you that, you know, and we're going to celebrate our 30th year of marriage this year. We've been together for 32 years. But she's going to tell you that I told her when I was in my early 30s, when I got 50, I was going to run for office. And that's exactly what happened. But the long story behind that was the overarching vision. The long story was everything that I was doing was preparing me for that, kind of. I had a mentor in Miguel Contreras who was I think, if you study out who Miguel Contreras was, I think he was the most dynamic leader of our time. I think from a space that he operated in, he controlled so many decisions that shaped the way we live today. And he did it in a way that benefited the people that have put him in charge. But when I look at that, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of vision here, there's a lot of planning, and things we were talking about 25 years ago, I actually see. Like, for instance, Rex Richardson is the culmination of some things we were talking about 20 years ago, talking about the Long Beach plan. Rex is the culmination of the things we were talking about at that time because of the environment. Just because of the way that he deals with policy and inclusion and collaborative working, strategic working with LA, with the county sewer. Long Beach has always been very parochial in the sense that don't compare me to LA, don't compare me to San Jose, don't compare me to Oakland. And when you're trying to use data, you've got to use those checkpoints, right?
Right.
But the overall attitude of the leaders was, no, we're Long Beach. But kind of the way we looked at it is, let's look at Long Beach in comparison to these similar entities and what we can do better, and how do we move, this constituency that we have. In a lot of areas, Long Beach has its own airport. Long Beach has a port, right? Long Beach is, when you put it in perspective of the United States, it's what, the 35th, 37th largest city in the country.
Wow.
But we operate from a place that we're this little small town. You've got a council that's part-time, which is an injustice to the residents of Long Beach. Because if we made the council a full-time job, number one, you're going to get better quality of people running, but it's really going to enhance, and this has always been my estimation, it's really going to enhance our position at a national level. I will say that our last two mayors, both Rex and Robert, have made tremendous strides in positioning Long Beach from a national perspective. Now, that'll change tremendously if Donald Trump wins the presidency, right? But as long as there's a Democrat in office, that will have a lot of influence because, number one, Long Beach has the second largest port in the country. Through our ports, we touch every congressional district in this country. So there is an economic influence on every district in the nation coming out of Long Beach. But when you look at how funding is distributed at a federal level, Long Beach has the greenest, Long Beach and LA have the greenest ports in the world. But the dichotomy is we have the dirtiest air. And it's real easy for everybody to point their finger and say the port is the problem, but it's not the port. The port is a portion of the problem. But the port is probably the biggest portion of the solution. Not the problem. It's the biggest portion of what the solution is. And then we have all these regulatory agencies, AQMD, and all these things putting all these unrealistic goals, which is going to hamper economic viability on a worldwide scale. And I think one of the things that I've seen with both Mayor Bass and Mayor Richardson is their willingness to address this, and they've got to figure out what's best for them in their space to address it, but to make sure that the San Pedro Bay, because as a port complex, remember, LA and Long Beach are competitive ports. We're competing against each other. LA's number one, Long Beach is number two. So we're competitors. But at the same time, from an environmental standpoint, we have to work collaboratively. Because whatever happens to you in LA happens to me in Long Beach. And whatever happens to us from an economic and a market share perspective is good for both of us. So even in our competition, we have to find those nexuses where we can work together and strengthen the region. And when we strengthen the region, starting with us, we strengthen the state. Because we're the biggest ports on the West Coast. We're the biggest ports in the country, realistically. And you can drop Newark, New Jersey in there to interact with either one of us at any point in time. But when you look at the conditions of maritime, the San Pedro Bay is always a more, particularly for people that are trading from Asia, which is our number one trade partner, you know, logistics and port and transportation, that's all about time. It makes the most sense for them to come to LA or Long Beach. I bring it on a boat, I put it on a train, I put it on a truck, however I get it to wherever else I'm going. The quickest amount of time I can get there is going into LA or Long Beach.
Is there enough space?
There's enough space if we work on the things that we have. You know, like during the pandemic, we had all those empties on. You've gotta make sure that processes are in place to move things that are detriment to cargo movement. It's not just a question of space. It's also the supply chain is really that. I need to have warehouses that are open, that when I take this stuff off, I can send them to you. See that the supply chain is much bigger than what people think. And the ports, we're landlords, right? We're not running operations on any of the ground. That's both us and LA. So we have to use our influence to make the people that are our tenants do what's right. It's very complicated. Yeah. I love this far more than city council.
Really?
It's a bigger chess game.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, think about it. It's international trade. It's ambassadorship. And the constituency that you're dealing with the most is the environmental. Don't get me wrong. I love the city council when I was there. I think we made tremendous moves, and I see the benefits of that going down to Rex, and even seeing it through Joni's office, Al Austin. The things that we planned a decade ago, they're still moving forward and moving North Long Beach forward. But there's a bigger part to that.
Yeah.
Right? We're just a piece in the cog, right? But if we work collaboratively, the cog will do what it's supposed to do, and that benefits the people of this region.
You know, that's so interesting also, just because to me, anyway, it seemed from the outside, obviously knowing very little about it, that it, you know, all of these like clean air programs, all these that the environmental stuff had been kind of negotiated and it was over, and now the real battle was automation and what was going to happen to these workers. But the way you're describing it is that environmental issues are still going to be the defining features of the sort of unfolding of goods movement into the near future.
They have to be. Only because of, you know, that dichotomy I talked about. We've got the greenest ports. So, number one, in shipping, there are no national standards. There are no international standards. Right. So when you look at greening ports and doing things that no one else is doing, it's happening here right in the San Pedro Bay. Now, if our government moves to standards, we're going to be so far ahead of everyone else. Right, because we're already doing those things. You know, the biggest polluters are not the trucks; it's the ships that are sitting out in the ocean. But the ships coming in Long Beach and Los Angeles, they plug in.
Yeah, they're plugged in, right? So that's
what I mean.
They're not running.
But they don't have to do that everywhere. So for them financially, where does it make sense, right? So one of the things that we're working on internally and collectively is we need to get standards, at least nationally. Because, you know, you can go to Port of Savannah, you could have a truck as old as you and I are bringing stuff, right? No one's on their head about that. If I do that here in Long Beach, they're going to call me a major polluter, where we're moving toward all of these bogies that you have, but a lot of them are impractical because we don't have the technology. You know, you want truckers to convert to $1 million trucks. Where's their subsidy? How are you going to help? How are you going to help someone that is a trucker move to $1 million truck? Unless there are programs designed to help him transition. So the conversation between are they a worker or are there's so many layers to this. and to make it work out where, you know, I like to use the term everybody eats, because I always believe we can get to that place. But it's going to take some work and commitment from all the parties that are involved.
So what do you think? Should we keep going? Should we take a break and try to meet again?
Let's try to meet again, because you know, Friday night I have my Bible study. I've got some stuff I got to prepare for. I would love to complete this conversation, maybe let you kind of refresh and think about some things you want to.
Yeah, because I would love, you know, I think part of the obligation for a historical society is also to get that sort of micro history of not only your life, but also your political career in those early days and how it unfolded. So I think that part of the story I'd love to hear more about. And I certainly want to hear a lot more about the port, too.
Yeah, the port,
and the current
I will tell you, the port is the most interesting thing that I've ever done. Right. You know, you think you know about it coming from city council, but it's, and if you look around at our region, you look at every city up to 710, their whole city economy is based on goods movement. Right. It's based on moving those boxes out of the port to wherever they're going.
And I mean, let alone the Inland Empire, right? All those warehouse systems and everything
Our
else.
Our whole
you know?
regional economy is
based on
the
goods
engine. Movement.
Right, it's the engine of the whole region.
So that's why that supply chain issue is so real. Because if we're, you know, our executive director, Mario Cordero, has been saying we need to be a 24/7 operation. You know, we say we're 24/7, but, you know, the 710 freeway is the worst freeway in the United States freeway system. Right. Why? You got all this traffic from the port, you got all these diesels, you got all these trucks moving. Is there a way? That's why our rail project is so big, to move things off the trucks onto trains.
Right. So is that the future, or is it going to be that the 710 is eventually they're going to figure out how to put a second layer? They're going to figure out what, you know?
Let me tell you this. I got involved in Long Beach because when I moved here, after I moved into my house, I found out it was in the path to be demolished for the expansion of 710. So my involvement in Long Beach politics was to advocate for my neighborhood not to be removed from the 710. Okay. This is 2003.
Okay.
2006, I run for city council. All this time, I'm working for the Labor Federation, but all this aside, I'm just dealing with what's happening in my neighborhood. I'm not even thinking about how this corresponds to my work.
Right.
I'm just thinking about, hey, nobody told me this. You're about to eliminate my house. No, we're not going for it. Right. And that's my entryway into Long Beach politics.
Well, that's fascinating. And now it comes full circle.
So since that time, I've been on the city council. I've chaired the I-710. I've sat on the SCAG committee, which is Southern California Association of Governments. I've sat on the COG, which is all the transport. I've been on every transportation committee that the city has dealing with goods movement of the 710 since 2005. I've come to the conclusion that the city's up along the 2000, we're never going to get freeway expansion, because just like I got to advocating in my neighborhood because you were going to remove my house, that's happening all the way up to 710. So every city is dealing with what I was dealing with in 2003. So their advocates are saying, you got to find a better way. We've been doing this for 30 years. We haven't found a better way. But think about it. People that have built a home, you know, I've been here since 2003. Where else am I going to get the value for my home if you come and take my home? So nobody is going for that up the freeway unless we come up with a solution that everybody can live with. But anytime you start talking about we're going to take 500 houses from this city, every city council up the freeway is going to say no. That's what we've been experiencing. And that's never going to change. So there has to be another solution. When do we come to the place and say, We've been talking about this for 30 years. This shit ain't gonna happen.
Right.
When are we gonna do something else? Let's be creative and think about how we can, to your point about making it double, that we've talked about this for 20 years.
Right.
When do we come up with some real plans for it? Otherwise, we keep continuing down this path that we have.
And rail too.
And my experience has been, right, that's why rail is so important. But they said the same thing about the Alameda Corridor, and it hasn't lived up, right? So I lived through that.
Right.
It was supposed to take all of these, and it hasn't lived up to that.
Yeah. Right.
And that's the apathy that the average voter, or not the average voter, but the informed voter has. You make all these promises to me and nothing ever happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem with politics. How do you make shit happen? Because the first answer is always no. No, we can't do it. Why? Well, we've never done it before. That's not a good enough answer. The question in politics is, how do I get to a yes? Because the first answer is always no. I'm telling you from my personal experience. I've got a great idea. We can do this. First answer is always no. I don't care who you talk to in the city, whatever municipality, the first answer is going to be no. The question is, how do I get to a yes?
So what's the first step in that process of breaking that down, of thinking differently about something?
Getting to people that have real decision-making authority to listen to what your argument is. Which comes back to the point that I said that it's about relationship, access and influence at the end of the day. And you have to take advantage of access and influences during seasons, because you're not always going to have that. Administrations come, they change. Every time a new administration comes, there's a new focus.
Well, that's super interesting. I never thought of that. Yeah. Season is a great term for it.
An administration can come and turn around everything you worked on for 10 years, right? Because that's not my interest. And if I'm the decision maker, that's the problem in government. Wow. At the end of the day, that's what the problem is.
Wow.
If you had people that came in and wanted to continue, and that's rare. The reality is that's rare. If I replace you and we were adversaries, I'm not trying to do anything you were trying to do, right? But that's really the wrong. If we're coming from the same community, we might have had different ideas about how to get there. But if what you've been working on is this close to coming to fruition, maybe I should make sure that happens and then build on it, as opposed to not wanting you to get it. But that's the nature of politics.
Well, I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to continue this conversation and maybe get involved in a different kind of way.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think Long Beach. I think we're in a great opportunity right now. If you look at the horizon, so we've got the World Games in 2026. We've got a Super Bowl coming here in 2027. We've got the Olympics coming in 2028. That's why there's this big push to clean up homelessness, because the whole world is going to be focused on LA and LA County for 3 years in a row. That's why Rex and Karen and the county supervisors, which I've always thought was a mistake from a personal standpoint, to talk about what you're going to do to eliminate homelessness. Because realistically, I don't see that as something in my preview. I can do things to help facilitate it, but at the end of the day, if I weigh the pros and the cons, there's going to be more in the cons column than the pros. Now, that doesn't mean we don't work on it, because that's a position that they've taken. But at the end of the day, when we get 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I think those are the things that the detractors of both Mayor Richardson and Mayor Bass are going to point to. Because the only way you're going to address the situation in the way that you're verbalizing that you want to do it has to be a collaborative. It can't be left on a municipality by itself. So there has to be a really broad coalition because this is a societal it's a societal issue. It's not a governmental issue. There's all kinds of entities that play a key role in that.
And it's a national issue because, I mean, a lot of our populations, come from elsewhere too. I don't mean that in a sort of conservative point of view. I'm just saying that, like, literally, our homeless problem is much larger than it is in Iowa,
Right.
And so, but that's fascinating. I didn't think backwards the way you're thinking about if you're a politician and you make a certain kind of promise that, people are going to hold you to that promise.
Because there's going to be plenty of people that remind you of that promise.
Right.
Even though you make great strides in that space, but it's a tough space to be in. And then people have such an apathy for our elected officials today. That's why we elect people like Jesse Ventura and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Donald Trump, right? Because people are tired of what they call career politicians. So anybody coming in saying we can do this, and I'm just telling you, as a pastor that operated in that space, everybody talks about change, but government is not designed to change. The question is, how do you make change happen in that system? And it takes you a few years to figure it out. You got to build some stability if you really are going to make change. And the level that you see change the most consistent is at a local level. All politics are local. Your city council, your board of supervisors, your school board. That's where you're going to see the most change. Because once you get into state and national politics, now what your agenda is being dictated you by the party. You do what we want you to do. Otherwise, we're going to cut your legs off. Forget your opponent. I'm going to cut you off because you're not. That's the way it works. So at a local level, I can see my work. I can see the change that I'm talking about. And I can have the biggest impact. But once I get to state and national, it's a whole different animal. Different players. Because now the state is really broken up into regions. Northern California, Central California, Southern California. They all have different issues. The question is, how do you align those? Nobody's really been able to figure that out. But at a local level, I can see what I'm doing.
We should stop, but I'll just say this one thing about, when you look back on it, one thing that is interesting is that there was an investment in the 2000s in the poor, right? In goods movement. And it was a very wise one that this particular sort of fountainhead of prosperity, in a way, right, was done. But it was a regional, kind of thing, right, that allowed this thing to grow. So, I wonder if there is,
There's
so it
a
can
lot
be
of
done,
promising things that are on the horizon. So the Port of Long Beach has, are you familiar with Pier Wind?
Not really.
So the Port of Long Beach, look up the Pier Wind issue. And Pier Wind, the Port of Long Beach is looking to build wind turbines out in the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
The largest pier wind project in the country is coming out of the Port of Long Beach, where we're going to build land in the ocean and put these wind turbines like you see when you go out to Palm Springs.
Sure.
Right? Each one is as tall as the Eiffel Tower to generate energy for the state of California. This is one of the biggest projects that is coming down the pike for the next decade. So in that, if all of this comes to fruition, there is going to be a manufacturing boom for the type of products that have to be built here in Long Beach, because these things are enormous in size and capacity. So you can't be having them coming from all these other places. It's going to have to be manufactured in a relatively small geographic area.
Interesting.
Let's say
so it's
LA
just not
County.
parts that they can ship from China and do that kind of thing.
they're going to have to build
Build it
here,
here.
which produces all kinds of opportunity for regional communities, not just Long Beach, not just for LA, but everybody in the region, if there is a real dedicated plan on what that looks like. But all of this is coming down the pipe. So you got Pier Win, you have the Pier B rail project. It's $100 billion project over the next decade to take as many trucks off the road and put those containers on rail. It's coming out of the Port of Long Beach, but it's going to benefit the Port of LA and Union Pacific Railroad. It's supposed to do the same thing that the Alameda Corridor was supposed to do. But again, opportunity, right? So I think, and from everything that I can see, that the leadership of the municipalities right now, the county, the city of Long Beach, the city of LA, are all thinking they're all thinking in a collaborative way that we've never seen in this region, which I think positions us very well to continue to get federal resources and state resources, which we're going to need to fulfill these projects, because the port can't pay for it by itself. They're going to have to get federal grants. They're going to have to get state grants. But making sure that we get those commitments from those entities are going to be very important. And then that's where our political leaders are going to have a lot of influence. So there's a lot of things on the horizon that can benefit this city.
Well, how should we figure out? I would appreciate, say, another hour of your time at some stage. Let me what.
Well, let's do this. My schedule is really fluid.
Okay.
Let's touch base maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, and we'll schedule out a time for next week.
Perfect.
And then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
We see how much we can knock out next week.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you. This has really been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
I
really
appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking the time just to get my perspective. I know my perspective may be limited, but I'm going to try to be as transparent as I can.
No, and it's lovely that it can also then just kind of be in the archive too, right? And it can be there for, and also be part of this larger project.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
All right, I think we'll go out this main door.
Okay. If you just sign it, I can fill it in, and
I'm the narrator.
Yeah. Or a date, I think.
And what's today's date?
The 5th.
Wow. I should know that. Yesterday was my anniversary.
Did you guys do something exciting?
The really ironic thing about
it's flashing, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is my mom passed on the same day, 10 years ago. So it's really melancholy for us. Right. We celebrate when we go to... we take a vacation. My wife and I take a vacation in Florida every year for the third week of April. We go visit my sister and my brother-in-law, but there's a jazz
And you said your
festival.
daughter is there too, right? In San Antonio?
No, my daughters are in San Antonio, but sometimes, periodically they come down.
Oh, sorry, Florida, Texas.
Yeah,
my mind is...
I go to all the Republican states, but but I go there every year, and we kind of celebrate my birthday, her birthday, and my anniversary while we're there.
Right.
So what I do, on our anniversary is really go sit with my dad. My dad's like 87.
Right.
And he and my mom had been, they had just celebrated their 60th anniversary, and they were like 4 months into that when she passed away. So I just go hang out with him on my anniversary.
Right, yeah. I can't imagine. My parents have been married for 50 years. It's interesting. I was telling this to somebody recently, which is simply that it feels weird to hang out with just one of them.
Yeah.
Rather than both of them.
Right.
Like I just grew up that way. So it's sometimes even, and so I can't imagine what it must be like for them, Anyway.
And we used to travel with them, like they would travel in their retirement, and we would be their chaperone. right? So my wife and I would always, oh, where you guys going? You going to Paris? Yeah, we'll go because we got to keep an eye on you guys.
Right.
So, they were kind of like our travel buddies. And ever since my mom passed, my dad doesn't do anything.
Right.
We used to go on 3-4 cruises a year. He just sits in the house. Fortunately for me, my sister's son, he's been attending USC. So he's there at the house with him.
Okay.
Yeah, so he lives with them, which is great. He's 28.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm taking him with me tomorrow to gather signatures for a ballot initiative. He's a good kid.
What's the initiative for?
We're trying to get, we're working on, it's being called Measure H right now. It's probably going to be Measure A when it gets on the ballot. But it's a homeless initiative. The Measure H funding that we've been paying into for years, it has what's called a sunset.
Okay.
So the way our taxes are structured here in LA, we pay the highest state tax of anybody in California. So most of the time when we get a tax initiative, it's cost neutral for us because we're already at the maximum we can pay. But once those Measure H dollars, whatever formula they use to figure that out, once Measure H sunset, somebody's going to come along with an initiative and try to pick up that quarter or whatever it was for this. And we're trying to make sure it stays in homeless services. So there's a huge collaborative. The city of LA, Rex's office is behind it, Karen Bass's office, and the county board of supervisors, along with my former employer, the United Way, and then hundreds of agencies that are working in homeless services. So all we're trying to do now is get enough valid signatures to get it on the ballot for November.
Okay.
And we have the final. I've been working on this for months. We have till the end of April to get the signatures in. We need like 250,000 valid, and I think we're at 200. Wow. We're at like 2,100, so we really only need about 500 more valid signatures.
Right.
So by the end of April, and we're trying to get everything complete by the 15th. So we got this big walk out of this homeless organization called St. Joseph in Venice tomorrow. We're expecting about 300 people there from all these different entities, labor, our elected officials, community groups. So we'll have about 200-300 people walking on doors, getting people to sign the petition tomorrow. Right. So I think this event in itself will probably get us over the hump. We should get enough valid signatures this weekend. I hope we do because, I've been working on this all this year since November. So I'll be glad when it's over.
I am happy we began this way just because I wanted to get a sense, of what politics on the ground looks like, and what it actually means. I listened to our conversation again this morning, and we covered a lot of ground last time, from your early life to your time in the union to the United Way, and then we jumped in some ways to the port. And I thought, especially
we left out the council piece. Huh?
Yeah, we left out that middle part that I think would be valuable to have.
Because when I left the United Way, that's when I went to the city council. Right. So that was 2010. So I started at the United Way in 99, 2000. And in 2010, 2006, I ran for city council. The district I represent. It used to be when you cross Del Amo, now you got to get all the way to South Street. Right. I ran against the incumbent at the time, Councilmember Val Lurch. And the ironic thing about the 9th District is it's always, or has been probably for the last 30, 40 years, the largest district by population.
Oh, really?
In the city. Huh. Yeah, as far as populace. But for the last 30 or 40 years, every census, at least the last 4 census, is getting smaller and smaller in geography. It's moving closer and closer to its borderlines. And it only touches District 8 the way the districts are comprised right now.
Okay.
So, the ideal thing is for every district to have around 50,000 people. We got 9 districts, supposedly each with 50,000. If you can go back and look at the population, District 9 is always around 55, 56, 53, 52. Then you'll have other districts that are 46. Right. You know what I mean? But
right.
But it's getting smaller and smaller in geography, but it's growing in population, because as we develop and as we do the downtown plan and you start moving out, like your low income residents, where were they going? The reason I moved to the house I'm in 2003, and I lived about a mile, maybe a mile or even less than that, a quarter of a mile north, and I was right off Long Beach Boulevard and Alondra in Compton, and I'd been there for 10 years. And the property taxes were lower in Long Beach, the property values were higher, the services were better, and my wife and I moved, and all our kids went to school in Long Beach Unified School District. So we moved from Compton to the spot we are now, and a few months after I got here, get a flyer on my door, and next thing I know, they're telling us our house is being removed for the expansion of the 710 freeway. And that's how I got involved in politics in Long Beach. So I started going to meetings about the 710 freeway and how it was going to affect my neighborhood. Because we live literally, the 710 is in my backyard, and out of my south window is the 91. I live right at the 710 and the 91.
Okay.
So, my initial entree into political life here was just advocating for my neighborhood and just find out what was going on with my house. Because, the realtor never told us that when we were moving, and, I could have literally moved somewhere else.
Right.
But that's how I got involved. And it was so ironic when I become council member, then I chair the I-710, committee, and I've been involved with transit in that sense ever since that time. Right. Either serving on, there's regional transportation agencies, SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments.
Right.
So my entire time on the council, I served on that, and I served in the transportation committee, which deals with ports and logistics and good movements and everything that I was interested in, only because it made sense for my district and it made sense for the city. And then there's another regional organization called it's the COG. It's the what's the acronym? So many freaking acronyms. Council of Governments. It's the Council of Governments, and it's basically the cities that run up along the 710. It's Lakewood, Signal Hill, Bale. Everybody going.
So you're a council member, and you have committee meetings to deal with stuff that's to do with Long Beach and representing your particular district. And
actually
then
representing the entire city on the committees as a city.
Right. But then you go and you serve on these other regional governing sort of agencies, and you're going to represent the city on those.
Yeah.
Right. And so, how is this a part-time job? I don't understand.
That's what, it was so funny. I always say this, I had a staff of 5 when I was on the council. 5 people worked for me full-time for the city. And we were pretty good at getting interns. I would get an intern from Cal State Long Beach. I would get an intern for an entire year. I'd get one person for 6 months, and then 6 months they'd swap them out.
Right.
But I would get an intern every 6 months with an arrangement I had with Cal State Long Beach, which was great. They came out of the sociology department, and they worked in the council office, and they were a big help to us. But, there'd be meetings in the daytime, and of course my chief of staff is there because, Rex works for the city full time. They're like, where's the council member? He's at work. Because my job technically was in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
Even though I was working out of their Garden Grove office, they listed my work location as San Diego, which was the headquarters.
Right.
And part of that was so, I wouldn't have the conflict of interest things that come up
Right.
with you. Because I was still working. You know, when I left the United Way, I worked for American Income Life for a little while, and then I went to work for another labor union, ASME UDW, but they have no members in Los Angeles County.
Right.
All of their members are in Orange County, 12 other counties in the state, none in LA.
Right.
And their headquarters is San Diego. But they had an office in Santa Ana, which is 20 minutes from my house. So I was literally, I was serving as the assistant regional director there while I was on the city council.
Right. So what drove you to, so you become active because of the 710 expansion possibility.
That's how I got involved. Yeah.
And then what is the next step you make?
The next step I make is, just going to like the neighborhood association meetings, and I remember particularly going to a meeting, and our present council member, or the council member that was in office then, Val Lurch, who preceded me, I really got kind of appalled at how he was treating the constituents.
Huh.
Right? Because, neighborhood associations, if the council members show up, they come, they give information, and you're always going to get hard questions because everybody's going to tell you everything that's wrong. We go in and we're talking about all these great things we're doing, and the district is fine, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
They want to know A, B, C, and D. And that's just the nature of the work, right? You got to know that. I don't care what meeting you go to. I don't care what you're telling them, how great your story is. There's going to be somebody in that meeting that's got an issue that they want to fix, and they're going to blame you for it. Right? That's the job. But I was kind of taken aback at how he would, particularly women, how he would try to, in my word, the word I used was bully them. I said, I could do a better job than this guy. Right? That was the first thing. And then really, Councilmember Al Austin and Eric Bradley, who used to be very active in Long Beach politics, set me down and said, you could run for office in the 9th District and win. Because at that time, Councilmember Austin was very involved in the Democratic Party. But he and Eric Bradley came, they took me out to lunch, and you should run for office. And, I had that experience, and I said, I know I could do a better job than this guy. Right? And nothing, in Val and I started out as I'll say enemies, and we end up as very good friends because when I finally did, because I ran against him twice. I lost the first time, I won the second time. But he was really gracious in the transition and, turned over everything to me. Wow. Told me everything that he was working on in the district, all the things that he was trying to get accomplished. So the fact that, because a lot of people don't have that, they come into a council office, there's no records. The previous guy is, the oath is, I turn over everything.
Right.
But that's not how it works in reality, right?
Right.
Depending on how hostile the thing was, some people don't turn over anything to you. So you walk into this part-time job, you don't have a clue what to do because there's nobody that's your boss, right?
Wow. Yeah.
If you never worked for the city before, you have no idea to navigate through the system, how to get anything done. It's like, okay, you're the council member. But for me, that was very similar to my union upbringing. I ran for office. I became an executive board member. And it's okay, you're the executive board member. Here's your area.
Right.
Pretty much the same thing, right?
Okay.
You walk in, it's like, figure it out.
Right.
The good thing for me is, when I did come on council, during my transition, I was very particular in what I wanted in the staff because of my background. I wanted like an organizing kind of model. My staff, I told them, you're not going to be sitting in the office just answering calls. You need to be out in the district. You need to be out in the district, taking notes, finding which streets have potholes. Just be out in the district so there's a presence. So I was really looking for really, really young staff or people that were viable and kind of thought like that. And we put together a plan to kind of make that happen and then to build up our neighborhood associations. I think when I took over, there were 6 neighborhood associations in District 9. And when I left, there were 13.
Okay.
Right? And we kind of organized the district using the neighborhood association model, which was already there, and just where there weren't neighborhood associations, we found leaders there to kind of create that, which is a great leadership development tool. Our current council member, Joni Ricks Odie, comes out of that system as being the president of her neighborhood association, right? Working very closely with the council office, getting appointed to a commission. And I have some understanding of how the city works, how it operates, and I'm much more prepared to come in from day one. Now, before I did serve on the Workforce Investment Board. So I was a commissioner at the time I ran against Bob Foster. Bob Foster had appointed me a commissioner for the Workforce Board representing labor after I lost my first election.
Okay. So who funds elections, by the way? How does a council election, how does that happen?
Well, let me give you some examples. So I've run 2 elections for city council in this. I ran in 2006 and I ran in 2010. In those 2 elections, I didn't raise $100,000. I actually raised more the first election, the one I lost in 2006, I raised 50. Wow. And the one I won, I raised 44,000. Now they're raising 200,000, 300,000. And your campaign limits are small. Your campaign limits come from, I'm not even sure what it is. I think it's $400 for a council member now. I think when I was running it was like $3. It might be somewhere between $400, $500.
So it's really grassroots fundraising. I mean, you're going to your district and asking people to support your campaign.
Most people don't get a lot of money out of their district. The truth is, there's going to be people in the business community that support you. There's going to be labor unions that support you. There are going to be those entities that can play in that space do. That's what a bulk is. You can go back and look at anybody's anybody on the current council or previous council and look at where their money comes from. And you can basically tell what their interest is. Your money is either coming from labor or it's coming from business. Right. So or a combination of both, right? If you really do it right. Right? Because you want to represent everybody. Right. And, when I ran, so my job in labor, I was always looked at as we were like social workers. So I ran a nonprofit, which was a joint operation between the United Way and the AFL-CIO. So when union members are out on strike, I'm there with food, feeding them. I'm paying their utility bills. So all of those unions that I had worked with over the last decade that went on strike, the entertainment unions, the IATSE, they have a strike similar to what they had. So I provided food and paid utilities, the Teamsters, the grocery workers. If you go back and look through my funding thing, that's where the bulk of my funding came from people like that. Right. But folks are like, oh, labor. But there was a personal connection because they, I provided services to them in that sense. I've always been like a community kind of guy. But the bulk of my funding came through those type of labor unions. Because, I work at the Labor Federation now. We represent 300 some odd unions in every industry. Right? Yeah. So, when you have access to that broad of a funding base, that can help. Right. That can help tremendously. And that's what was very, labor's been very instrumental for me, as funding, as providing people to knock on doors, all of that, all of that comes along with particularly grassroots. What we're very good at is going door to door and talking to people. Right. And that's the key. I was making the point, when I ran, I researched the previous elections that had happened in the district to see how many votes it would take. Because the 9th district at that time, prior to me running in 2010, was one of the lowest performing districts in the city. District 1 was the same way before Robert Garcia got down there, where, you've got relatively large districts, huge voting populations, and council members were getting elected with 700, 900 votes. Wow. 55,000 people in the district. 55,000 people living there, 20,000 voters. and you're getting elected with 700 votes. So it's pretty clear that if you talk to people and you engage people, you're going to increase voter participation. Right. And that's what we've done up in the North. You saw it in my election. 2 years after me, it was Al Austin. After that, we did Rex. After that, Austin had a re-election, and you see Austin and Tanua. But we've increased voter participation up in the northern part, particularly 9, considerably. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because when Val won it must have been 2000, he had 700 votes. And when we ran it couldn't have been 2000 because I ran against him in 10 and lost. No, 10 I won. So it had to have been before that. It had to have been the 98 or whatever the 4 years was before that, because I lost to him in 6, so it would have had to have been 2002. 2002, he had 700 votes.
You weren't disenchanted after losing that first time? Like, what was it?
No.
What's that feeling like when you have put in all this work?
It's a crappy feeling.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, it was a win-win for me, right? Because there were a lot of people that were saying, hey, we like you, but, there's power in the incumbency, right? We like you, but if we support you and we lose, this guy's going to be mad. He's got to vote on our contracts. But if you run again in 4 years, you're going to be our guy. Okay. I got a lot of that.
Oh, wow.
I got a lot of that from not only labor people, because they got to play smart, right?
Right.
We got contracts coming up. This guy may have to bargain the contract. We got to support the incumbent, right? We like you. We think you'd be a great council member. I got a lot of that. And even residents, they were like, why are you running against him now? Why don't you just wait in 4 years? But the thing about waiting 4 years is in 4 years, when I ran against him, it was just me and him. It's just the two of us on the ballot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I run in 4 years, it's going to be 4 or 5, maybe 6 people, because it's going to be open seat.
Right.
So the win-win for me is getting name recognition in the district.
I see.
Right? And then having a base when I come back in 4 years.
Okay.
Because I can start with those 1,200 people that voted for me 4 years ago. Right. Hey, I'm running again. Are you with me? And most of the time, that's going to be a yes.
Okay.
So it was strategic in the sense where it was a win-win. And then the 4 years that I wasn't on the council, I went to 3 council meetings a week. Anything that happened in my district, I spoke on it, right? Wow. So I stayed very visible. I was a workforce commissioner, right? So I was very active, and that expanded, my connections in Long Beach, meeting, more people of influence in other spaces outside of labor space, particularly business. Sean Lamanchi and I developed a really, really strong relationship. He was with the chamber business, and business and labor aren't supposed to, but we got along great. We worked on some committees. That's where I met Derek Simpson, who has since gone on to do tons of things. He was on that committee. It was a lot of good people on that committee.
Right.
And then I had to resign when I won the council seat in 10. Okay. But that's how I stayed active.
Right. So you were completely engaged in that way, and then you walked into, and it's a sort of great tutorial, I guess, in a way of, if you're going to every single city council meeting, you're learning exactly what the politics are, and who the players are. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And kind of what the procedures are.
Right.
Because when you walk in, okay, I kind of know how the council work, but how to run a council office.
I was going to ask you. I mean, famously, you hired Rex, right? So how did you build a staff? How did you figure this stuff out? How did you learn about building I'd run
a nonprofit. I'd been assistant pastor of a couple of really big churches. In one church, all of the assistant pastors reported to me. So that part was pretty simple. Tony Oranga was a dear friend and a mentor to me. So the first person I hired was someone off of her staff that already worked in City Hall that knew how to navigate. Right. And then I got someone from the police commission that came from a dear friend at the time, Carolyn Smith Watts. She recommended someone that was working for the police commission, working in a city capacity, not in a full-time job. And I hired her as my office manager. So I hired those two spots. And then I hired Rex, and I had to work it out with his union as chief of staff. And he and I had worked together on some projects, running some food banks together. And he was on a really fast trajectory at the union he was at, and all the people that were ahead of him, the guys that I kind of came up with, they were transitioning, and they were all depositing into him to kind of run their. It looked like he was on a track to run the government relations department of the union. He was bright, we had talked a few times, and I thought he would make a good chief of staff, just because of the things I'd worked with him before, and I'd seen how thorough he was. And we had worked together on some campaigns, and it was, and then he actually hired our communications director, which was Floyd Hampton Livingston at the time. So, and then I brought one person over with me from my staff at the United Way.
Okay.
And that's really how I built the staff. But I brought two people that kind of knew how to navigate in the city, which was really important. And before I brought on my office manager, I took on Suja, or no, was it Tonya? I took on one of Tonya's office managers as he was transitioning, because, when people in City Hall have to find other jobs.
Right.
I took on somebody that was already in there, someone else from Tonya's staff, and Suja Lowenthal ended up hiring him to her staff in the capacity I had while I was filling these vacancies.
Okay.
Because the first person I brought on was one of the field deputies from Tonya. I thought I had to have somebody that knew how to move around in City Hall. Right. That was the most important hire for me at that time was that person.
Right.
That knew who to call and all of that stuff that could really help us along. So I had two people like that. And that's how we built the staff. And then we just built from there with the interns.
Right. So what were the politics of the 2010s? I mean, what were you guys facing with and working on at that time?
Well, the city itself was in a budget deficit. Okay. Right. Foster came on in 2006. The whole time I was there, we were cutting police. We were cutting fire. We were cutting fire stations. I remember one of the first meetings we had, it was a budget meeting. And what was on the chopping block was the Fire Station 12 in the 9th District Rescue Unit, or the Long Beach Municipal Band. Long Beach Municipal Band didn't even play in North Long Beach. I'd never seen them Long Beach Municipal Band. But 200 people from nicer parts of town came and talked about why the Long Beach Municipal Band was so important, and the council made the decision to cut the fire. And that's when Rex and I said, we got to organize this district.
Right.
We cannot have this happen. So we lost that in my first term. One of the first things that happened, and Rex was successful in getting that back in 2008. 2008, getting it replaced. That happened in, not 2018. So there was no rescue unit in North Long Beach for 8 years.
Wow.
Because everything was a budget crisis. So it was really challenging times when I was there, because we weren't adding. Everything was addition by subtraction. If that's such an oxymoron, right? Because I always said there is no addition by subtraction. We're just subtracting.
Right.
Sounds good, but
right.
Reality.
That's a tough. I didn't think about it. Yeah, you come in the political environment you come in it,
right,
and you have to be able to manage that. And that must be really tough. You come in with ambitions of expanding things, providing more services, doing more for the community. When reality is that's not what's happening here. Yeah. Wow. I mean, the whole time I was there, we were cutting. We were having to make decisions. Do we cut
police? Do we cut crosswalk guards? You know, everything
Right.
was a cut. My entire term.
Right. Wow.
I will say this: Bob Foster made us look at things. I think he was the right person at that time, and then Robert Garcia coming behind him and having served in that environment. I just see, you know, because Robert was perfect coming behind Bob, and then Rex and Robert were so close, and you know, kind of how they moved. Because Rex served as Robert's vice mayor almost half the time Robert was mayor, which was preparing him for the position he's in now.
Right.
Because you're privy to a lot more information as vice mayor, right? And, you know, they strategized and figured out how to...
So what do you learn when you, as a politician, by having to make those kinds of, navigate those waters, right? Of the sort of drying up of funds, of making these difficult calls?
Well, I think the most valuable lesson I learned is, you know, people try to put labels on you. Oh, you're this labor guy, you're that. The thing that I really learned the most was to really listen to people. Because, you know, when you're getting lobbied for whatever the issue is, two sides are coming in and everybody's side sounds great, right? And then, you know, really listening to what both sides are saying and trying to figure out what's the best way either for the city or for the district. How do we make this happen? So it made me more sensitive, because I like to work from a place like this. You know, regardless of what our backgrounds are, what our philosophies are, if we can start on the things that we agree on and then work out from there, as opposed to, you know, I say left and you say right. We know where, but what are the things within this thing that we agree on and work out from there? We could get a lot more things accomplished. And that's kind of the beauty of Long Beach, and the fact that it's nonpartisan elections, is you and your colleagues are kind of forced to do those kind of things to move the city. Because, you know, the whole dynamic is whatever, you know, if there's going to be money distributed, the thing is, whether it's divided by 9, it's 9 council members. If there's ever where you have a budget surplus or anything where they give money to different districts. And then I argued that concept. I'm like, you know, there's not a lot of equity, and people are like, what do you mean there's no equity in divide by 9? Everybody gets the same thing. I'm like, that's great if we were all starting from the same place. But if you're looking at a district that has had the lack of investment, particularly in infrastructure that I'm coming from, even if we divide by 9, I'm always going to be at the bottom. Mm-hmm. At some point, there needs to be some extra attention given to some of these issues so we can get to the place where 8 of you already are. Right. Because, you know, we're so low, we got to look up to see the bottom. You know, Houghton Park, during my tenure, you could touch on the building and it may fall apart. That's why there's a new structure there. Right. But we worked for years to secure the funding to get that done. Right? And then one of those divide by 9s, you know, my colleagues saw the light, and we got far more money in North Long Beach than in other parts of the city, because we had so much catching up to do, because there had been a lack of infrastructure investment, particularly on parks and recreation buildings. When you look at Houghton Park, it's the second largest regional park we have in the city, next to El Dorado. Wow. That's why we activated it and started the Jazz Fest there. People are like, oh, nobody's going to come to North Long Beach. It's dangerous. It's terrible. Nobody will come here. Well, we've been doing it now for 13, 14 years. There's never been one incident reported to the police. It's a free concert. It was deemed as a community building event. And, we set it up to be the premier event in North Long Beach, and it still is. And I keep telling the successive council members, you got to keep it free as long as you can. Right. Because that's having a free concert, bringing quality talent, showcasing local Long Beach talent, bringing vendors, and it's turned out to be a pretty decent event here in the city of Long Beach. Right. But originally, people were like, nobody's going to come to Houghton Park. Right. It's so unsafe up in the north. And, we've always said the North had great neighborhoods, but the business corridor sucked. But I've been in this city long enough. I remember when this area used to look the way North Long Beach looks now.
Right.
I remember when downtown looked the way North Long Beach looks like. Belmont Sherman. What were the things that all of those had in common? They had a business improvement district. Okay. So we started the first business improvement district.
So what does a business improvement district do?
They take an assessment through your property taxes to pay for services that the city can't pay for. Mostly it has to do with cleaning safety. Like you have the Bixby Knolls, they're right across the street, the Bixby Knolls Improvement District, one of the best in the city, right? It's been transformative in this area going back to when it was run down up here, right? Same thing with downtown, Belmont Shore. So what they do, the main two programs are clean and safe, right? You might get power washing on the street, or we contract that out with a contractor. And then we have security guards that patrol different hours of your business corridors. Okay. Things that you can't pay for out of the city budget when you're cutting police can be supplemented through a business improvement district. Okay. And then, other services provided to your local businesses to help them improve. And if you get your business improvement district really moving well, they can help them market, right, and bring customers in, right? Because all of that's good for your community. Raises sales tax, and that's where our money comes from, right? Spend your money in Long Beach. Don't go to Compton. Don't go to Lakewood. Don't go to all these other. And North Long Beach is on the border of Paramount, Carson, Compton, Lakewood, and Bellflower, and Rancho Dominguez, right? And, we've lost some folks that we've been trying to get over to Atlantic for years and years, went right across the bridge at Compton. Part of that has to do with the processes and how long it takes to get businesses through the system in Long Beach. Right? Making the system, making it more business friendly. My dad, back in the 80s, used to have a financial store not too far from where you are. If not, it was somewhere on this block. And he tells me to this day, I will never put another business in Long Beach. But that's from his experience back in 84, 85. But he left from here and went to Irvine, right across the street from John Wayne Airport, and made a killing. But couldn't make it here in Long Beach. Right? And it had to do with how the city interacted with small businesses. All of that's really important. And ultimately, that falls on the mayor's plate. Okay. But, if he's open to suggestions, oftentimes council members may have some ideas on how you can improve some things like that.
Right. So you talked about infrastructure, you talked about the parks and that important kind of addition that you did to Highland Park when you were a council member. What infrastructure is such a broad term, what are there, was part of that whole sort of uptown renaissance other kinds of, you guys put Michelle Obama there, right? Like, was that,
or all of that was,
and now there's all this housing stock that seems to be coming up there.
Well, most of the how, and to my point about how long it takes for businesses to, the library, all of that started under me, right? Wow. It got finished under Rex, but it started way back. It takes a long time for us to move processes through Long Beach. Okay. And that's been one of our challenges. How do we make things more efficient? And I think the last two administrations have done, and even Bob did some things to make it much more efficient.
So how does stuff get bogged down?
Just the processes, building. You got to go to all these different departments to get permits, and it depends on how long it takes. Right? If it takes me 2 years to go through the process to put a building up in Long Beach, and I can go to Signal Hill and get it done in 8 months, right? That's where I'm gonna go. Yeah. And those are the kind of decisions business owners make, right? What's in the best world? Every time you go down to City Hall, you got to pay money. There's something you got to pay for.
Right.
So it's up to the leaders of the city, the mayor and the city manager, really to come up with processes that are best suited for that. And going back to Atlantic was on the verge of really, really popping right before COVID.
Okay.
Because there were big plans for a lot of those properties that are vacant, and then COVID kind of blew that up. Right. So now it's back to square one. Wow. But I feel really confident with the new council member that's coming in and her background in development alone. Having worked for one of the biggest ministries in the country and running their community development corporation, which builds housing, that's part of Tanua's expertise. Is she's going to be really, really fantastic, and I think that's going to help. I really think that's going to help transform the Atlantic corridor.
Okay. So what happens after? First of all, depending on how much we can wrap up whenever you like.
I got a hard stop at 3. That's probably 5 minutes. We can probably pick up some time. How many more sessions you think you need?
No, I mean I think we got a lot, right?
Okay.
I mean, I personally at some stage would just love to hear more about goods movement and the port and the work you're doing, just because it's
a fabulous thing I've ever done.
I think it's really interesting and really important,
is.
and I think it's not enough. People aren't talking about it enough, and a lot, and I think it would be good to, talk more about that. But that can be done whenever. But so we can just sort of build a bridge to that. You've been on the city commission, right? What happens afterwards? After your 2 terms?
Well, actually, I did 1 term.
Oh, you did 1 term. Okay,
I did
excuse
1,
me.
and
Okay.
So after that, I go to work for John Molina at. Well, I was still working for the union. I was still working for ASME, and then I went to work for John Molina at Molina Healthcare.
Okay.
Doing civic engagement and community outreach. Same thing I'm doing now at the Labor Fed, which I just went back to a year ago. Right. Because John was a very innovative guy, particularly in that space. And
was it just that you didn't want to do it after 4 years? Like, was that just...
No, I actually ran for the assembly spot, and I lost.
Okay.
And, and I remember I was doing an interview with the LA Sentinel, and they said, what happens if you lose? What are you going to do? I'm like, I'm still going to be who I am. I'm still going to be active in the community, right? I was serving on the Measure A commission at the time, once Robert passed the Measure A, I served on that commission for 4 years. Then I served on the Long Beach Transit. I was on Long Beach Transit doing transportation when they tapped me on the shoulders to come to the port. So I stayed active in the city as being a commissioner. Okay. And then just with my neighborhood association. And I had a good relationship with council members and sharing, bouncing ideas off of them.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. But just doing more of that stuff and really delving in more. I take that time really to delve into my ministry and kind of build my ministry at the same time.
Okay.
So, and then, I was doing some consulting, doing some political campaigns. I did some work with the Long Beach Collective Association, the cannabis industry, and people are like, how are you a minister advocating for cannabis? Well, even, when it was legalized, I was on the council that legalized it. Okay. I always thought that it was bad policy and how we were dealing with them. Because remember, we're in budget deficits and, when we're figuring out what we're going to tax this new industry, there was no matrix. We're just, hey, we're going to tax it 30%, 25%. There was no way you were formulating what the tax should be. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the legal cannabis industry today, their biggest challenges are taxes at the municipal level, the city level. Then they get taxed by the state. Their whole tax system is messed up. Going back to my point about how we deal with a particular industry that could, if it was regulated better, could be very prosperous.
Right.
It could be very prosperous, and you're actually providing safe and legal cannabis products for people, which is, everybody thinks about weed, but you go into a cannabis shop, it's like they got 450 products there. Out of the 450, 50, if that many, have to do with smoking marijuana. The rest of them are something else. I use an ointment every day on aches and pains that I have that I buy not from my doctor or anyone else. I get it from a cannabis shop, and it's worked well for me. Right. So, I stayed, and even when I was doing that, I was doing, helping them with their statewide policy and trying to get the tax code changed. So I've been, somehow I just stay in this political circle. Right. But, I have, I'm blessed to have access and influence, I look at people running our state now, and a lot of them I've known, regardless of what position they're in, known for 25, 30 years. We kind of come up through wars and battles together, so you have access, but not only having access with people, but having influence and being thought partners and folks that are really trying to do, trying to move things better for the lives of the people that they've been put in charge of. That's always been my core mission, because I always said, I'm not really a politician. I'm a pastor that's called to the community, and this is kind of how I've been used. Right. But it's been an interesting ride, and if you look back, if you think about this, man, before I ran for office up here in the North, all the black council members had come out of Central Long Beach, the 6th district. For 40 years, I think there have been 6 council members elected out of there in 40 years. Well, since my election in 10, the black council members are coming from up here.
Right. Because
there's been there's been a shift in where black people live. And, just in this area, you've got doctors, you've got firefighters, you've got police, you've got law, and they vote at a higher percentage. Even though they're working class people, they're more educated, they're up on the issues, and it's a bigger voting block. And that central district has always been multicultural, but what you've seen over the course of the last 4 or 5 decades is just African Americans that may have even started there moving further, moving into California Heights and Bixby Knoll, right? Into those areas. I mean, one of our leading people that we talk about, Doris Topsy Elbert, who was elected the first black woman in 6. When she passed, she lived right around the corner from here. Her house was right here in Bixby Knolls.
So what kind of perspective do these issues of having representation that is diverse bring, especially when it comes to gender, when it comes to race? Like, well, how is it different than...
Well, think about it like
just this. As a pragmatic like, what does it provide?
It gives you more insight on what people are actually facing.
Okay.
Right? If everybody making decisions for you, number one, don't look like you, don't face the same issues that you face, then perhaps their solution might not be best for you. Right? So when we're inclusive and we bring everybody to the table, you're going to get a more variety of ways to look at situations. And my personal opinion is you're going to have a better way to move as a collective.
So maybe this isn't a very precise question, but like at the table itself, when there are people that are diverse like that, especially women and, people of color, how does the decision making, is that different than, say in earlier incarnations of your political career or your union career, right? When yes. These spaces become more diverse, what happen? How is politics different?
I think politics becomes different that, let's say, the dominant culture. Well, I'll use that phrase. The dominant culture has a way of like, I use the example, infrastructure hadn't been done in the North. there were conditions that we had up there that you wouldn't find down in Belmont Shore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that the council member? Is that the people? What are all the factors that, why haven't you done maintenance in Houghton Park in 25 years? Right?
Yeah.
Personally, I believe a lot of it has to do with whoever's in office. If you want them to do something in your district, you gotta bang to make them do it. Because the first answer to everything in politics is no. Mm-hmm. It's always no. Oh, why? Oh, we've never done it, or we don't do it like that. Or the question is, how do we get to a yes? Mm-hmm. How do we get to a yes? Because when you start bringing that other perspective, those different perspectives, you're not just gonna settle for no. And then if you can, organize people and get them to come out, and because we're as a member, you're supposed to be representing the voice of your constituency, right? I'm really not supposed to be sitting there voting. Well, Steve thinks it should be like this, and I've always tried to govern like this. If I had 10, 15 people call me on an issue, right? Normally I would vote the way the people, they took the time to call their council, and they're like, well, what about everybody else? And, I had somebody tell me that in a meeting. I'm like, everybody else didn't call.
Right.
Must not have been important to them. But these people took the time out,
right.
and their position seems logical. I'm going to vote the way the people called and said, we want you to vote this way. Nobody else said anything, so they don't care what I do.
Right.
But I think that's our job. And I'm looking at it from that particular aspect. I'm going to tell you something Rex and I did, because we did a lot of community. We would always bring the community together. And we would tell them, we're going to do whatever comes out of this meeting. But after we do it, don't call us and say, hey, why'd you do that? Because we had this gathering, and this is what you guys came to. This is the consensus we came to. But I can tell you this, Mihir. Every time we shared the information that we had, most of the time, 98% of the time, the people came to the same conclusion that me and my staff came to with the information that I had. Right. So the key is being transparent, share the information with people, and most logical people, if they're taking time to come out to your meetings, they care about what happens in their neighborhood. If they care about what happens in their neighborhood, it makes it easier for us to organize the neighborhood and build the neighborhood, build safety in the neighborhood, because you've got more and more people that are being involved. I used to say, help me help you. You're like, you're the council member, do it. No. I might call you and say, I need you to come down to the council on this day and talk about this item. Right. The first time, 9 people came from North Long Beach and spoke on an item, and the council voted on that item, and they're looking at me like, what are you doing up there? But I learned that from my first meeting. The people from Belmont Shore, they all came, the band. Right. We cut a freaking fire station. There was service in Lakewood, Bellflower, Compton, all these people. Mm-hmm. But the council's moved by all those voices that come and speak on an issue. I'm like, okay, I see how this game works. Right. And when I say 9, I'm like, God, the bar is so low. The bar is so low. For 9 people came. We gave them talking points. They spoke on it. The council voted unanimously because 9 people showed up. I'm used to seeing 25, 30, 50 people, but only 9 came from North Long Beach, and it moved the entire council. Wow. That's the change. Mm-hmm. And it's small, but that's grown, right? That's grown over time. Now, we've got a very active district in the 9th district because, you've got all these neighborhood associations. They're great spots for leadership development, right? Great spots to identify people that can serve on commissions and help you promote the district in their specific sphere of the district. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, for me as an organizing, it's just about organizing and giving your community as much information as you can. I campaigned on having meetings all across the district, and we did that. We would meet at Ramona Park and Houghton Park, and so we would bring everybody's not coming down to City Hall, so take City Hall to the people, and whoever shows up. Right. But that's how you build it. And then the other thing we did was, same thing. For months before I came in office, I walked the district. I built my whole platform by walking and talking to the people. Right? My platform came to, oh, this is what this person said over here. This part of the district, they said that. So it gave me a framework on how to build what the district as a whole needed, because every little neighborhood has their own separate challenges, their own separate issues in regards to the broader issues of your district altogether. And then if you just sit down and meet with Public Works, you get money for streets and alleys and all of that. My staff met every week. We developed a plan. It's like we can fix every street, every pothole in our district in one term. If you utilize your funding right and you work with the departments that are there to do it, and they'll gladly put a plan together on you. Right. So assess all my streets from worst to best. Let's start working on the worst first. We'll do, say, the best for last, and let's pave every street. And Public Workers love that. They put together a plan. Right. And if there was more money coming into it, sidewalks, alleys, all of that stuff. That's really what you're called to do as a council member: land use and getting people's trees trimmed and their potholes fixed. The tree trimming schedule, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. When I was there, you were on an 8-year cycle. If you got yours done this year, don't expect to be done for another 8 years. We'll see you in 8. Right? That, I don't know if they fixed that issue, but as far as getting your streets fixed and everything, I think that's a simple fix that I believe any elected official could do if they just sit down and take the time and talk to their Public Works director. They will put together a plan for you to get your streets in order, and your people are going to love you.
What's remarkable is when you drive from North Long Beach into Compton.
Isn't it ridiculous?
It's insane, right? It's just a physical reminder of, what governance does. It is, thanks to folks like you who've made that possible, right? It's just a huge, actual. My kids are like, "What's going on?" Right. Like, what's happening to your Prius?
Right. And don't do it at night, man, because you don't know how big a pothole you made. Compton is, when John Chang was state controller, he was talking about going into receivership for that. Their governance has been, that was another reason that I moved from there as well. Right. And made the move a little bit south into Long Beach, because it had much better governance, and my property values were higher, my property taxes were lower. It just made a whole lot of sense to move down the street, and where I live, people's like, we thought this was Compton, because it's still, I'm right at Long Beach Boulevard and Artesia. Okay, I can literally walk to Compton College. Right, it's maybe a 20 minutes. I don't even think it's a mile. It's probably 3/4 of a mile. But we worked really hard to kind of change that area. And when you look at crime statistics, so some of the highest crime rates are right here at the entrance of the city. Because you've got all those multifamily dwellings like at Greenleaf, right, and Long Beach Boulevard, right. On that, so that's where a lot of our crime in the 9th district, starts there, and has to do with gang activity, and it's been sex trafficking down this corridor for longer than long before we were there. Right. It's been going on for a year, but it's been exacerbated. And we were working with Doug Halbert about how to change zonings for the motels, and even that's catchy because the people that own the motel, that's their business. Yeah. Right. They're making a living. So, I try to factor in all those things. Yeah, that's complicated. Right? Yeah. It's like, okay, I want to change this. I want to get rid of that. But at the same time, if you got owners of the property that you can't talk to or are absent, it makes it a little bit easier to make those kind of decisions. Mm-hmm. But when you got, particularly on Atlantic, you got people that own buildings and they rent them out to different vendors. So you have to factor all that stuff in. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think you're so right about that.
it's not just labor, it's also business, right?
Right.
Like you have to be able to talk to
represent
both
everybody,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can stay true to your core values, but the calling is, the job is, how do you represent everybody and do that in a fair way? And that's the challenge.
Okay.
But that was the fun part for me because, like I said, it gave me a chance to really, really listen and just try to be pragmatic about a situation that's gonna help the most people at the end of the day.
Right.
Because no matter what you do, somebody's going to... If we cured cancer, they say, why didn't you cure AIDS? You should have cured AIDS, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter, it's always going to be somebody that is... They're just opposed. Some people just oppose the people in authority.
Right.
And I don't know if I told you the story, but I had this one guy when I was campaigning against Val. He was going with me, knocking on doors. We should vote for this guy. Helping me, introducing me to people. Did that the 2 times that I ran for office. Once I got in office, oh man, he was beating me up in all the meetings, talking about all the things we weren't doing. And I finally came to the conclusion he doesn't like whoever gets in the office. Once they get in the office,
then
he probably did the same thing for Val when Val was running.
Right.
And I just found that to be really, really interesting. How, I saw that kind of behavior in other people. Maybe not to that extreme,
right?
But it's like they were much more nicer when I was running for office than when I get in office. Because some of the things I have to tell you is not good, but I want to be as truthful with you and transparent as possible.
Right.
And that was something I learned from one of my labor leaders. He said, "Look," he said, "people are going to appreciate just going and giving them the information." He said, "They may not like what you're telling them, but the fact that you're coming out to tell them, they're going to appreciate that." Right. So I've always tried to, incorporate that. And I'm going to tell you, it's a real easy jump to go from a labor leader to a council member. It's almost the same thing, only dealing with more resources. Right? And probably bigger and more diverse sets of constituents
and sets of concerns in a complicated way. Yeah.
But the key is how do you do the most good for the most people,
right?
For whatever amount of time you're there, and that's what we say. We're gonna push the envelope. We're gonna do as much as we can. Try to change the conditions, and I actually hired a company to help us rebrand. That's how we came up with the Uptown Renaissance. Mm-hmm. We hired someone to help us rebrand because North Long Beach is considered the armpit of the city, and most residents, was coming out and all the things, and it's like we need to change the way that people think about themselves up here.
And I think it echoes what you said in our previous conversation about changing how people think about Long Beach as this sort of provincial little town, or we do things differently, when you're actually a big gosh darn city in America. You're a big player in America, and so you got to think differently. And you got to be much more sort of mature. Bring in somebody to brand something, right? That's such a smart idea,
Instead of us, and we hired somebody and we had that printed on all of those things, and we still use the phrases Uptown Renaissance. The mayor uses them. Mm-hmm. It's he was part of that team, but we actually paid, surveyed, and that's what we talked about in all our talking points. There's a renaissance in the North to get people to buy into that idea.
Right.
There's investment in the North. Jordan High School is going to be the most modern school in the district. That was supposed to be done before I left in 2013. It's still not finished. It was supposed to be done in 2013. I left in 2014. It's still not done. That's why I say it takes a long time for us to do shit here.
Yeah.
Way too long.
I sometimes think it's also an issue of the state. I have a
that is part of it.
Like, for example, I have my brother-in-law works for the Nature Conservancy, which is this big, and every time he's trying to get something done, right? Like good ethical work about saving the environment, like develop some river, reconstitute a river, do something. How many commissions he has to go through, how many, and then each one wants something else, and each one, and it's just like, you're doing God's work, this is really important work, and yet, like, he's like, half his time is just sort of navigating these shores,
Yeah, and then the other part, just going back to before I left, we used to have redevelopment in this city, and the state took the redevelopment. It's like, this is but backwards. You should be giving us money, not taking money from us.
Right.
I mean, how are we supposed to thrive? And that's part of the reason that it takes so long too, because those tools that we had to develop no longer exist. Now you're transitioning from a city. Long Beach makes a lot of money off of oil.
Right.
You're transitioning away from oil. That's going to create a budget deficit for the city if you don't replace that. What are you going to replace it with? Are you replacing it with retail? I go down the street and I see retail places closing all the time. So how are you going to replace that $10 million a year? Because next year in that budget, they'll be coming saying, oh, we got a $16 million deficit. Right. Well, $10 million of that is that oil that you're, right? So there's got to be a logical transition. Yeah. It's the same with the ports. You know, we've got the greenest ports in the country, but the dichotomy is we've got the dirtiest air. That's not all the ports. Mm-hmm. But the ports, it's easy to blame the port. I'm not running any operation. We're a landlord. Mm-hmm. We're not really running any operations. We're a landlord. Right? The operations, all of that. So the supply chain is that. You got to bring all these people in and get them all to work together. And, you know,
so do these like COG and SCAG and are they efficient? I mean, are they doing...
They can be.
Okay.
I've been on them at different times. What I'm seeing in this iteration that I'm with right now, and I think SCAG is really efficient. The problem with SCAG, in my estimation, is it's too big. You got a representative from 187. Do you know how hard it is to reach consensus with 200 people in the room?
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
And you're coming from all these different political, the challenges. So they got to break things up into committees, but you got to include everybody in the county. But it's 188 cities in the county. Just about everybody got a representative.
Yeah.
It's hard to reach consensus with that many people in a room.
Right.
It is really hard. So you need good leadership there. But they do, you know, because they get federal funding, transportation dollars. I see their biggest impact in, like, the urban planning, the planning portion, and getting that. And what they're doing at the COG now is getting us, because, you know, the city's up to 710, don't really care for Long Beach and LA because we're the big dogs in the room. We get all the resources. Because if they're going for a grant, you know, most of the time we're going to get it because we got grant writers. Right. These cities don't even have grant writers. Right? They don't have staff. So one of the advantages that they could have is when they collaborate as a region through the COG or mechanisms like that.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's how the Artesia development is getting done. Rex got $36 million out of SCAG. Long Beach didn't pay for that. He got SCAG to pay for, and it goes through Compton, I think, to Bellflower.
Wow.
So there's a way to leverage that. And, you know, I remember when I was there, Bob Foster and Pat West, they're like, why do you waste your time going to these? I'm like, number one, we're the second largest city in the region. We should be more influential in regional issues instead of this, we're Long Beach, we're all off to ourselves. That attitude that we've had for years and years, I don't think it serves us well. I think it hurts us. And working regionally and having more regional influence, I think is to our benefit.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially when we're trying to get dollars from the feds and the state.
It's you're preaching to the choir here. But listen, we are already over. I know you said you have
I gotta.
So, thank you so much.
Thanks
it was really, I learned a lot, and I think these have been two very, very. I think there's a lot of information out there on these things. So I really appreciate it.
I'm really looking forward to you guys. See the conclusion. This almost looks like the